Greetings, my name is Brendan Kersey, and in this video I'm going to demonstrate my first prototype for a nice rail grinding functionality that I've added to my third-person character from previous videos. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So, for this, I've kind of gone through some very straightforward basic prototyping. I'm still working out like the full details of what it is I want to fully get out of this rail grinding system. So for starters, I made a nice little basic sphere collider and attached it to around the general feet area of where my character's feet will be underneath the capsule. Reason for this is because is what will be used to detect whether or not we have overlapped with our spline components. One of the things I learned today was the usage of spline components. Now there are these nice rubbery, stretchy type components to where you can kind of like draw out nice curvy paths and things such as that. And you can also use that for making objects follow that path, hence how we're going to make our rail grinding. So for starters, to kick things off, I'm using a combination of both Blueprints and C++ in order to accomplish this. Mostly just because I like to show off that I'm capable of using both interchangeably. So in truth, I could actually just simply create the collider in C++, but like I said, I like to show off that I'm capable of using both interchangeably. So for starters, our on-commode overlap begin for our sphere collider for rail grinding is pretty straightforward. I just simply check to see if the other actor has a component that is of the spline variety. If true, set the reference for our spline that is in our C++ class. And then I do another branch in which I check to see, are we currently grinding? And then if false, begin grind and then say is grinded true. Begin grind is here in our C++ class, right here on the right where my mouse is. So I'll go ahead and briefly kind of go through what it is that I'm actually doing. So I start off by using the begin grind method, and it only has one line of code in which we set our timer and activate it. So I have our nice little timer handle, our rail timer, and this is what's going to handle the full calling our grind method multiple times, so that way from start to end of the rail, our character will be fully moving along that rail and such. So what it does is about every generally around delta seconds. I use GoPro to try and make as close to or as FPS friendly as possible. So moving on here. So for these first two lines, what I'm basically using is distance is going to be kind of a set value between 0 and 1. The reason for this is because down here on the 212th line is I'm going to use lerp to gain a calculated distance between 0 and the full float point value of our spline. So what I do down here is and I'll explain this portion here in a minute. But what I do is I find that distance between 0 and 1, and what it'll do is it'll spit out a float distance. What I do down here next is within two methods called get location at distance and get rotation at distance, what I do is I take our value and I plug it into our spline API. And what this does is it calculates two separate vectors in which I will get our location along the spline and our rotation for our character along the spline. And then down here, I simply use the set actor location and rotation method in order to just simply set our actor's location and rotation as it implies. One thing I will note that is of a bit difference here is that I did make a little offset right here for our Z. Main reason being is that because I'm using a set actor location, without an offset, what it will essentially do is it will put the character kind of like, put the rail kind of in the middle of the character, because what it'll do is it will have our transform point be set to move along the spline, but because the skeleton isn't automatically, since the skeleton is lined up with the transform point kind of at the center, and kind of show you what I'm talking about. Kind of imagine this central point where this arrow is right here. That's kind of where our transform point is. So basically, if I don't have an offset right here, what will happen is imagine our rail being right where that arrow is. it will essentially look like our character has been impaled by the rail, which obviously we don't want. So moving along with that. So this will be a nice transition into our grind variables. So I have my Boolean right here isn't grinding, it's adjustable in editor. I can see that for debugging purposes. The next bit that we have here, I'm going to kind of move this over a little bit and make our character a little small, is percentage of movement. So right here, as you'll see, I have this one line here at 205 saying percentage of movement divided by 100. And you may be asking what that is. So for right now, just for basic prototyping, what I've done is I am using the percentage of the spline's total length in order to determine speed. So what I'm essentially doing is at every single call for the grind method, I am setting a percentage amount and adding that to the current value for distance. And that's how I'm incrementally moving it along through my lerp down here at line 212. That's how I'm lerping from 0 to 1. Hence why I also have my clamp method here, because if I were to go over 1, it'll be automatically clamped to 1, because obviously you can't plug a value higher than 1 into our linear interpolation method here. So that kind of controls our speed. Later on, I will move that on to a different type of speed adjustment. This was just kind of put together for prototyping purposes, so I can at least get a nice function bit going. So for the last bit here to kind of explain for this is what happens when our distance gets to 1. Well, like I explained earlier with our linear interpolation, once we hit 1, we are obviously at the end of our spline. So what happens next is I will clear the timer, I will reset our distance to 0, I pull a basic character class method launch character. That's just for a nice, neat little jump at the end of the rails to signaling, hey, we've hit the end of the rail. And then, of course, I reset is grinding to false, so that way we can, of course, if we come into contact with the rail, we will be able to grind on that as well. So, yeah. So the next bit that I'll be doing here is kind of demonstrating how this works and kind of talking about what I plan to do with the next iteration for improvements. So go ahead here. So pretty straightforward. And here we go. So something that I've kind of done here is just that there we go. So with what I've done here, it's a nice, pretty straightforward, simple grinding thing. And if you're curious as to why the animation changed, that's because we are technically that was part of my setup. I will eventually make some nice little custom animations for log grinding, but I figured for right now, this is perfect fun. So like I said, what it's doing is essentially now that we come in contact with the rail, we're kind of starting our timer, and we're kind of linearly interpolating along the path. So as you can see, regardless of bends and twists, things such as that, our character follows it just perfectly fine. Kind of a way of saying it. Alright, so that's kind of the basic thing. So you know, for fun, let's kind of speed this up a little bit. Kind of show off that we can indeed adjust our speed. So, 5. And let's kind of do that here real quick. There we go. So as you can see, speed is definitely adjustable. So I'm going to go ahead and take a brief moment to talk about what I'll be working on in this prototype. So as you can see, I can kind of like freely move my camera, which is not necessarily what it is that I desire to do with this. I'd like for it to be much more kind of concentrated, so that way I can give like kind of a mix in between like freeform and also focused on the direction of the rail itself. So I might actually try to go ahead and just fixate the camera, that way we can let players know, have players look in the correct direction that we would want them to. Second bit, as you may have noticed from the first run, is that we're kind of, right now for this first prototype, regardless of where I actually start on the rail, I will actually start from the beginning and then move all the way. That'll be something that I work on in the next prototype, to where I can essentially give kind of a freedom of movement between like to be able to just kind of jump onto any point of the rail and then just continue riding in order to get a mechanic. Kind of similar to like your Tony Hawk Underground, if you've ever heard of that series, things such as that. But yeah, that is something I would like to work on with the next prototype. So I think that really does that's it for this video.